And with that, President Trump taking his case to the highest court in the land, now asking the Supreme Court to reverse rulings by two lower courts that block his temporary ban on travel from 6 Muslim-majority countries. This breaking on Friday. We made it. It is the weekend is upon us. 2 more hours of news coming up, though. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm Leland Vittert, in for John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers, in for Jenna Lee. Began the week with you on Memorial Day and ending it on Friday.
Lucky me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, the news of the administration's emergency application, it comes on the heels of President Trump's decision to back out of the Paris Climate Accord in what many saw as a controversial decision, but the administration stands by it, saying that the president is fulfilling his campaign promise to put America first.
This is an agreement that puts an enormous burden on American consumers, on the American economy, while allowing countries like India and China to virtually get off scot-free for a decade or more. And the president today, after listening to all sides, after listening to European leaders last week, made a decision to fulfill his word to the American people, to get out of the Paris Accord, but also to leave the door open to the possibility of negotiating a completely new deal or going back into the agreement under terms that will put the American economy and the American people first.
Kevin Court joins us now live from the White House with more on all of this. Hi, Kevin.
Hey there, Heather. Always nice to talk to you, and Lucky as well. And you're right, this is obviously another bite at the apple, right? At least this time it's the most important bite, that being the U.S. Supreme Court. And the administration once again following through on yet another promise to do exactly what it said it would do, and that is take its plan for a travel ban all the way to the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, I just want to share for the folks at home sort of a look at the countries we're talking about: Libya, Sudan, Syria, Iran, Yemen, and Somalia. At issue, an executive order the president signed back in January blocking refugees from those 6 Muslim-majority nations for 90 days and suspending the U.S. refugee program for 120. This time, the Supreme Court will weigh in after a pair of lower courts ruled against the administration. Decisions that Vice President Mike Pence thinks was incredibly frustrating for millions of Americans.
The American people are heartened by that, but equally frustrated by decisions in courts that call into question whether the President of the United States has the ability to control who comes into this country. The ability to come into the United States of America is a privilege, not a right.
That last sentence is what a lot of people are hanging on to. The ability to come into this country is a privilege and not a right. Let me share the DOJ statement. We have asked the Supreme Court to hear this important case and are confident that President Trump's executive order is well within his lawful authority to keep the nation safe and protect our communities from terrorism. All this, of course, as the administration also continues to defiantly stand against the Paris Climate Accord. As you saw yesterday in the Rose Garden, the president laying out his reasoning behind pulling the U.S. out of that agreement. The president's mindset, fairly simple. The deal is unfair to the U.S. and its workers, all the while propping up other economies at our expense. And don't forget, folks, to be sure to join Fox News for live coverage of the White House briefing, which comes your way at around 1:30 today. We expect to hear from EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. I'm sure he will get plenty of questions about that decision.
No,
back to you.
Really? You think, Kevin? I don't know.
Yeah,
It might be boring today.
Maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Leland?
Well, as Kevin pointed out, it has been a busy week for the White House, and not all of it had to do with the climate deal or Russia. The Wall Street Journal printing a piece today titled "The News You Didn't Hear." Included in the article, the decision by Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to reopen Alaska's National Petroleum Reserve to exploration in a move that could revive the state's economy and reduce our dependence on foreign oil. On a related note, the Dakota Access Pipeline is now operational and transporting oil. The Fish and Wildlife Service is taking action to stop the Obama administration's last-minute endangered species listing for freshwater mussel in Texas. Didn't know about that. A decision that was done over the protest of state officials. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said he was open to completing the transatlantic trade and investment partnership being negotiated with the EU. And top Senate Republicans said they're confident they can produce a new health care bill by the end of July. let's bring in the U.S. news editor of that paper, Glenn Hall of the Wall Street Journal. Nice to see you, sir.
Good to be here. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Picked up the front page of the Wall Street Journal, as I do every day. In a way, she's calling her own paper out.
Well, I think the point that she was trying to make in her opinion piece was largely that, you know, a lot of the news that happens gets overtaken by other events. Sometimes the president's own tweets redirect the national dialogue in a different direction. Today's front page, I think there's no question, you guys were just talking about it, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, top news of the day, and you'll see that out there.
Is there simply more news than there used to be, or do we just know about more news than there used to be? It seems as though your job's gotten harder.
Well, I think this president keeps us very busy, and I think that the social media, the speed at which information is being shared around the globe, also has enhanced what we know about what's happening in other parts of the world. Also, the communication of that information is faster. So, yes, we're moving at a fast pace, but I think that the core job that we do is to try to filter that to some degree and present what is the most important news of the day for our readers.
For your readers and for the folks who look at it on the website as well, back to that article by Kimberly Strassel, the result is a surreal situation, she writes, and we can keep going back up, in which the near hysterical press coverage of Trump the man and potential Russian operative is utterly divorced from the substantive actions his administration takes or the progress it makes. So it sort of begs the question, which comes first, the chicken or the egg for this president who loves to knock the press?
Well, I think that is one of the challenges. We hear from a lot of people in the GOP, members of the party, strategists and so forth, that they wish the president would use this power, especially his Twitter power, to keep the message on his agenda and not allow it to be shifted over to things like Covfefe or things like, you know, who's investigating whom.
So often the media coverage of President Trump is compared to the media coverage of President Obama in his White House. Fair to say, though, that they are not equal in their ability to do what you just talked about, of stay on message?
Well, I think President Obama was a very disciplined, you know, approach to how he communicated.
His White House was pretty disciplined, too.
His White House was very disciplined. This president has been fairly accessible, also fairly visible to the people. He likes to speak directly to the American people, not standing always in front of the Rose Garden, but sometimes just right through Twitter. So it's a very different approach.
We've seen, though, as of late, a little bit more of a rollout of messaging. You have Scott Pruitt, the EPA head, there at the briefing today. We've seen Wilbur Ross be at the briefing before. We've now seen a little bit more of the surrogates going out, not necessarily just sort of on the political issues, but also on some substantive policy issues. And to that point that Kimberly made earlier about opening up drilling in Alaska, Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke on America's Newsroom this morning.
I look at it as America is much better if we're energy dominant, and the world is safer as America's strong. We have the resources. Let's get to it. We're going to do it responsibly in an environmentally conscious way. Nobody is better at oil and gas and energy, all the above, than the United States. We do it better than anybody, everybody, and our regulatory environment is the standard in the world.
There's an irony here that had the Paris Climate Accord decision not been made by President Trump and the administration decided to open up Anbar, the left would be going crazy about that and not really and have fertile ground to talk about it. Instead, the administration pulls out of the Paris Accord. That's front page news, and this very substantive move by the administration changing decades of policy suddenly gets buried.
Yeah, you know, the whole thing about the Paris Accord was handled pretty well if you look at it. The way the president and his team were out, the surrogates were out, and even today I was noticing that the president on his Twitter handle was really retweeting a lot of people who were praising his decision to pull out and showing the market reaction to all of that. So it was for one day we've seen some pretty strong discipline and a coordinated effort to get their message out and stay on topic. It'll be interesting to see if that's the new trend.
Yeah, and see if they can pull that off through the weekend then and into next week, as they've got James Comey then testifying and have to deal with that. Glenn, you got a vacation coming up. Hopefully you can take a break from deciding what goes on the front page.
I'll do my best.
All right. Safe travels. Heather?
No breaks from the news, though. It's nonstop with this administration. And we do have some new information for you on the state of the economy. Job growth appears to be stalling. Employers added just 138,000 jobs in the month of May, plus gains in March and April were revised down. But on the bright side, the unemployment rate fell to 4.3% from 4.4%. That is the lowest level in 16 years. But some analysts say that jobless claims are down mainly because people stopped looking for work.
All right, when we come back, in the wake of the Pentagon's successful missile intercept over the Pacific, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis on the road making an announcement today about how the U.S. will proceed with its Asia-Pacific strategy. We're going to talk to the former security advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney about this and the message it sends to nuclear-armed North Korea. Plus, new developments in that casino attack after a gunman opens fire, killing dozens. But get this, none of them were shot. We'll explain when we come back.
Oh my God, you guys, I can hear gunshots. Oh my God. Right behind Resorts World. And you can see the smoke and there's gunshots.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis announcing today that the U.S. will stay committed to its policy toward Asia as he arrives in Singapore ahead of a key defense summit to discuss North Korea and China. One U.S. official traveling with Mattis speaking about the tensions in the region.
There's a lot of concern in the region today over the rising challenges from North Korea, the threat posed by its nuclear developments, ballistic missile developments. There's concern over China's rise and its assertive behavior, particularly in the maritime space.
So let's bring in retired Navy Captain Bob Wells, former National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Heather.
So when you listen to a wide array of experts on this, they say that North Korea will likely be able to strike the American homeland with a nuclear weapon before the end of President Trump's first term. That's scary stuff. So how do we stop them?
It's very serious, and I think the way you stop it is exactly what we're doing with regard to the end of the strategic pause. It's a comprehensive effort. I think the visit now with Secretary Mattis at the Shangri-La Dialogue helps to reassure all the allies. We have 5 of our key alliances there that will be at the actual conference. It'll underscore the intent of what we're trying to do politically, diplomatically, also economically with the sanctions piece of it. We need to continue a steady strain with regard to the reaction to North Korea and prepare to defend the U.S. homeland.
Well, let's speak a little bit more about those sanctions because today the UN Security Council is voting on a U.S. and Chinese proposal to blacklist more North Korean individuals and entities and also some more sanctions. But it appears that China is not complying with the sanctions that are already in place. Here's what U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley had to say on China putting pressure on North Korea.
At this point, I do believe, and I think the administration believes, that China is doing back-channel networking with North Korea in a way that's getting them to try and stop the nuclear testing.
And in fact, we know that in the first quarter of 2017, the China-North Korea trade, it was up 37.4% from the same period in 2016. So how can we depend on them?
I think you have to depend on the diplomatic effort, and I take Ambassador Haley's point with regard to back-channel communications with the DPRK. It's the only real viable way to influence North Korea, I believe, with regard to the Chinese diplomacy. I think the sanctions can be enforced. They have been enforced in multiple violations of the UN Security Council resolutions by the DPRK. I think it's a long game. I think China is also a member of the UN Security Council with the United States, as well as the bilateral diplomacy between President Trump and Xi Jinping that was established in Mar-a-Lago will bear fruit. But it's going to take a long time. There's an incredible capability that the DPRK continues to demonstrate, as well as to flout the international will of the UN Security Council resolutions.
and something that we demonstrated 2 days after Pyongyang fired a short-range ballistic missile that actually went, 248 miles was estimated to have done that. We launched a ground-based interceptor from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. So do you think that that will do anything to show them, look, if you try this, we can defend ourselves? Or will it make them try harder?
I think it'll make them try harder, but it'll also make us try harder with regard to deterrence. We have a duty to defend the homeland. It's part of a comprehensive missile defense effort. We have units of the U.S. 7th Fleet that have the capability to intercept the intercontinental ballistic missiles in the boost phase. We also have to have that midpoint, which was demonstrated by the Vandenberg launch, the midpoint intercept capability. The bottom line is we need a defense in-depth strategy that we continue to develop. Our technology is really good, but we also need that diplomatic pressure and the sanctions regime to basically compel the North Koreans to really listen. We don't want nuclear proliferation. We don't want a threat to the American homeland by a nuclear-tipped ICBM. We will defend ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And what about the role of South Korea in all of this?
Critically important. We have a treaty obligation to defend South Korea. As you also know, it's part of the United Nations peacekeeping, or the United Nations forces there on the Korean Peninsula. We have to be very, very keen to the voice of South Korea. As you know, a lot of the artillery that the North Koreans have can decimate Seoul. So it's something that we have to keep in mind with regard to our military response, potential military response, our ability to develop a deterrent capability, as well as the political way going forward, listening to the South Koreans in order to influence the North Koreans.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Captain Wells, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Heather.
And coming in right now, new reaction to the president's decision to hold off on his pledge to move the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and what supporters as well as opponents are saying about its impact on the pursuit of peace in the Middle East. And former FBI Director James Comey set to testify before a Senate committee for the first time since his firing. Our panel weighs in on what we can expect from Thursday's hearing. Now, Karl Rove on just that.
He's going to show up, and my suspicion is he's going to say, well, the president brought this up, and I was offended by this. Well, the fact of the matter is that if he was offended, he should have said to the president, I think that's inappropriate. Or he should have said to the attorney general, I think that's inappropriate. But it wasn't inappropriate, and he didn't say it.
Right now, former FBI Director James Comey is confirmed to appear before the Senate Intelligence Committee next week. He's expected to face questions related to the Russia investigation and his interactions with the president. Heard a lot of leaks on this, nothing yet confirmed. Senior counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, says Comey's appearance could help set the record straight.
Director Comey goes to testify. I think that will be a very clarifying moment. I would again repeat that in his most recent sworn testimony, it had to be corrected almost immediately. He was off by hundreds of thousands in his projected calculation. But it's more important to have somebody testify under oath, frankly, than to have his friends and his former colleagues out there speaking to the media not under oath.
Let's bring in Leslie Marshall, syndicated radio host and Fox News contributor, and Lawrence Jones, Blaze TV and radio host, as well as a conservative commentator. Great to have you, as always.
Thanks,
Leslie, ladies first on a Friday. Every day, but we'll go on Friday as well. How much are liberals, shall we say, licking their chops at the prospects of James Comey under oath?
Not as much as you would think. I, as a liberal with chops I like to lick, especially when we talk about Trump and Russia, I don't think we're going to get the answers, and quite frankly, left or right, because the majority of American people want the answers, want the truth. And I think the question everyone wants the answer to is whether or not there was any collusion specifically by the president himself. If that is asked, and I don't think it'll be asked in that manner, James Comey is going to say, I cannot comment because there is an ongoing investigation.
Lawrence?
He already answered that question. James Comey already answered that question. He said there is no collusion between Donald Trump. There's no evidence to suggest that. He's investigating the campaign when he was there, but there was never any evidence. He told this to the Senate chairman and a ranking member. That's already been discussed.
But, Lawrence, isn't there a fear here among Republicans that if all of a sudden Director Comey testifies, as that original article said, that the president essentially asked him to back off Mike Flynn. It may not be a crime. We'll get to that in Karl Rove in a minute. But it certainly doesn't look good.
Well, he perjured himself if he goes on the record to say that, because he testified before Congress on May 3rd and said that the president has never tried to do that for political purposes. So I'm interested to see, the FBI, the former FBI director, is he going to walk that back? Because then we have other problems.
Well, and to your point, and it's the same one that Kellyanne Conway made, that if all of a sudden you have a discrepancy here in the sworn testimony, there's something there. Now to the heart of the matter in terms of whether or not the president said, please back off Mike Flynn. Here's Karl Rove.
The President of the United States is the head of the executive branch. The FBI is not independent of that authority. And the President was asking, I've just fired this guy. He's been humiliated in front of the American people. Can you go easy on him? The President could have directed him to drop the investigation. And unless there was underlying corruption, that is to say, the President benefited in a corrupt fashion from that decision, there's no crime.
Karl Rove's not an attorney, as far as I know. Neither of you are either, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we'll stick, though, to the politics of this, Leslie, in the sense that, again, it may not be illegal, but it may also not look all that great.
It really depends what was said. And when we talk about what was said, the president is denying what James Comey has already discussed and written in a memo. And James Comey, the way he presents it, there are two things here.
Leslie, we don't know what he wrote. We don't know what he wrote in the memo.
Speculation, right?
What I'm saying, well, we've had a lot of speculation. The bottom line is did the president say, look, this is a general who has served his nation well, go easy on him, back off a bit, or bury it? Very big difference. It can be the difference between a crime and not a crime. It can be the difference between asking a favor as the commander-in-chief and obstruction of justice. And it does come down to, though, unless there is a recording of this conversation, he said against he said, and one of those he is commander-in-chief.
Hold on, guys, real quick. Leslie, you got the first word. Lawrence, you get the last word on this. How does the White House try to put this behind them?
Well, I think they just stick with the facts, because if there was obstruction of justice, why didn't Comey tell the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General? That is his duty as the FBI director, and somebody that claims to be the superhero of the FBI and bring back the integrity. He's going to have to answer that. If he really felt like there was obstruction of justice, why didn't he report it? And he didn't until he got fired, apparently, if he goes on the stand and say that.
Well, and to that point, he has a duty if he feels as though justice is being obstructed. Certainly a question that he will probably get in many different forms. He is a lawyer, so he'll have an interesting way to answer them, we are sure. Leslie, Lawrence, appreciate you both being here. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Leland.
All right.
You
Heather?
too.
Thank you, Leland.
And as you guys were talking, the White House did confirm for Catherine Herridge that they are setting up a dedicated group to handle the Russia probe, the White House itself. So we'll follow
that war room we keep hearing about.
Yeah. Well, still coming up, a deadly rampage at a casino in the Philippines. Have you seen this? Following ongoing terror attacks in the region, but terrorism is being ruled out here. What police are saying at this hour about this incident. Plus, President Trump taking his controversial travel ban to the Supreme Court. And what are the chances that the High Court will side with the administration and reinstate the restrictions? Our legal panel takes up the case.
The ability to come into the United States of America is a privilege, not a right.
Welcome back. President Trump taking his travel ban to the Supreme Court as promised. The administration filing emergency applications last night, asking the High Court to overturn the rulings of two lower courts.
First, I think the American people can tell that President Donald Trump has no higher priority than the safety and security of the people of this country. He's taken bold and decisive action, asserting an executive order to pause immigration from countries that have been compromised by terrorism or don't have the systems in place that we can be confident that when people apply to come here, that they don't represent a threat to our families and our communities.
Wendy Patrick is a veteran prosecutor, and Tom Caniff, a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Thank you both for joining us on this Friday.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Heather. Wendy, I'll start with you. This is the case marks the first time that the president has tested it before the nation's highest court. What is at the heart of the case, and what do you think will happen?
Well, at the heart of the case, Heather, is context or content. In other words, should the court look at the four corners of the document and decide on its face, is it constitutional, or should it consider then-candidate Trump's statements on the campaign trail to decide whether or not this national security concern is a pretext? Now, the administration says it's not. These are countries that were identified by the Obama administration as hotbeds of terrorism, and that's the reason behind this travel moratorium. In other words, it's not about Muslims because most of the world's Muslim population remains unaffected. So 880 pages were filed last night, Heather, that the justices and their clerks have to read to decide, do we let it roll out now and rule later? That's at the heart of what they filed last night.
Yeah, and Tom, will candidate Trump's words, or should they, be used against President Trump's words?
Well, Heather, as I think Wendy just alluded to, that's one of the criticisms that a lot of people have had of the Virginia, the Fourth Circuit's decision. First of all, it's a very long decision, 205 pages, but a lot of those pages and a lot of the verbiage in that decision were devoted to really picking apart things that that candidate Trump said on the campaign trail. It referenced things he said on the stump, things he said on CNN. It even quotes from several of the president's Twitter messages, and we know the president loves Twitter. And a lot of people have said that that's, kind of hitting below the belt in some ways, that candidates running for president or any office will say outlandish things that really have nothing to do with what the content, what the four corners of this law are, and what the arguments for it should be or the arguments against it. Clearly, the Virginia Fourth Circuit went there. I'm not certain the Supreme Court will take that same approach.
Well, Wendy, with the full court now, with the arrival of Justice Neil Gorsuch, you have, 5 conservatives and 4 liberals, but do you think that they will go along ideological lines?
The reason that's such a good question, Heather, is that's the central question that people are asking. In other words, it's not a slam dunk just because it's now 5-4 weighted in terms of conservative justices. President Trump. I wish I came up with that. Alan Dershowitz said it. But what it means is the justices have to look at case law in determining whether or not this is a constitutional order, despite what then candidate Trump said on the trail. So in order to do that, they're going to be guided by the law on those lower court decisions, not so much what the president did and didn't say at any given point in time. If you look at it that way, there are many that think that this travel moratorium has a good chance of being upheld.
Well, Tom, we had a statement from the Justice Department saying this, that the president is not required to admit people from countries that sponsor or shelter terrorism until he determines that they can be properly vetted and do not pose a security risk to the United States. That makes sense. Legally, are they correct?
I think there's certainly an argument they are, and that's one of the things that the administration, remember, we're dealing with the second incarnation of this order, and one of the things that they did from the first order that was struck down to the second order that subsequently, at least now, has been struck down as well is, first of all, they eliminated Iraq. Secondly, they spent a lot more time delineating in that order the reasons why these countries, independent of the fact that they're Muslim majority, and there's a lot more than 6 Muslim majority countries out there that aren't included in this order. It's not just merely a matter that they're Muslim majority or that there's been terrorism that it's emanated from these countries, but these countries themselves have actually been state sponsors of terrorism. And that's where the administration is really trying to wrap their arguments around to get this ban reinstated by the Supreme Court on a temporary basis, so it doesn't happen next year by the time the Supreme Court's seated again in the fall and it's briefed and so forth. I think there's certainly some strong arguments to say that historically this sort of thing is within the strict purview of the President of the United States, and he's acting within those limits here.
All right. Tom, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Hope you have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, noteworthy that the Supreme Court has not always been friendly, shall we say, to the executive branch. President Obama, constitutional law professor himself, his administration lost about a dozen times, 9-0, at the Supreme Court. So there's been this check, especially under Justice Scalia, of the executive branch's power by the court.
Well, with the appointment, though, of Judge Neil Gorsuch, we'll see if that changes and if they, choose along ideological lines like we were just talking about.
Indeed.
All right.
All right. And now this. New information coming in on a deadly attack on a casino in the Philippines. ISIS claiming credit, but authorities there believe it may have been a robbery gone horribly wrong. Police say at least 36 people died, not from the gunshots, but from suffocation and smoke inhalation when the gunman poured gasoline on the gambling tables and then set them on fire. This story began breaking just about 22 hours ago. Will Carr live in Los Angeles with more on what we know. Nighttime now in the Philippines again. Hi, Will.
And Leland, we've just learned from the State Department that it doesn't appear that any U.S. citizens were killed. And while investigators continue to figure out exactly what led to the deaths of dozens of tourists and resort employees, we now know there was only one suspect, a man dressed in dark clothes carrying a gun who walked into the Resort World Manila's casino, an area packed with tourists, and started shooting and lighting things on fire.
Gunshots. Oh my God. Oh, right behind Resorts World. And you can see the smoke and there's gunshots and people are shooting at each other. Oh God. I live right behind Resorts World.
Chaos broke out, and while nobody was shot, more than 35 people died from smoke inhalation. The windows in the casino were locked and bodies were found around the casino floor, its hallways, and inside a bathroom. 70 others were injured, many surviving by breaking windows and jumping from the second floor. Security guards were able to shoot the gunman before he ultimately took his own life.
Our police went upstairs and entered room 510, but it was too late, because when they entered the room, the smoke was so thick, and he burned himself, which led to his death.
Authorities say the suspect tried to steal more than $2 million in gaming chips, and that's part of the reason why they don't believe this was a terror attack. While the Philippines has been battling ISIS in the southern part of the country, police believe this was a tragic robbery gone wrong. Leland.
Now, Islamic terror problem for a long time there in the Philippines. Will Carr in Los Angeles. Will, thank you. Heather?
Well, the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv will stay put for now. A step toward peace or a slap in the face of a key ally. We're live on the ground with some new reaction to the president's decision not to move the embassy to Jerusalem. That's what we were
right now, new reaction to the president's decision to delay moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Israelis expressing their disappointment, while Palestinians say keeping the embassy in Tel Aviv is a step towards peace. This was a campaign promise of President Trump. John Huddy in our Mideast Bureau just as Shabbat begins in Jerusalem. Hi, John.
Yeah, well, Leland, delaying, not abandoning, that's really the White House's message as far as moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Now, President Trump yesterday signed a waiver delaying the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem for 6 months, saying that it could have a negative impact on efforts to promote peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said that President Trump stands by his promise to move the embassy, saying that it's not if that move happens, but when, and this isn't to be considered a retreat from the president's strong support, as we've seen, of Israel. But nonetheless, many Israeli leaders are disappointed hearing the news. Prime Minister that, at least for now, the president isn't following through on his campaign promise. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office released a statement reading in part that, quote, maintaining embassies outside the capital drives peace further away by helping keep alive the Palestinian fantasy that the Jewish people and the Jewish state have no connection to Jerusalem. Well, Palestinian leaders, meanwhile, Leland, lauded the president's decision. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said that it was an important step that illustrates the United States' seriousness about promoting peace. When the president was here, he talked about restarting peace talks, but he did not talk about moving the U.S. Embassy. Leland?
6 months to go till another decision needs to be made by the president on this issue. John Huddy, Jerusalem, thank you.
Well, this Sunday, about 1,000 people expected to skip the elevators and climb New York's One World Observatory in honor of a New York City firefighter who died when he stayed behind to save others in one of the Twin Towers on 9/11. Now, the annual event raises money for our injured service members. Frank Siller joins me now. He's the founder of Tunnel to Towers. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Heather.
And you're also Stephen Siller's brother.
Yes.
And you started this foundation to keep his memory alive. Tell us about him and take us back to that day, September 11th, 2001.
Well, you know, Stephen was on his way home to play golf with his other brothers and turned his truck around, went back to his firehouse, got his gear, drove to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, where it was closed for security reasons, so he strapped the 60 pounds of fire gear on his back. He ran through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which is almost 2 miles long itself. You know, when he got to the other side, he joined so many other firefighters that gave up their lives that day. So we have an event every year, the last Sunday in September, September 24th this year, that retraces his final heroic footsteps. We're so proud now that we also do a climb. We do a climb every year at the Freedom Tower.
Right.
And what that climb represents, the heroism, the acts of courage, the loss of life inside the stairwells. You know, Captain Billy Burke, we know, lost his life on the 27th.
Tell us about him, because it's also in honor of him. And he was on the 27th floor, and he was telling other firefighters to get out when he already knew that one of the towers had fallen.
I'll catch up. You know, I'll catch up to you. That's what he's saying. I'll get, you know, he gave up his life to save somebody else, try to save somebody else. And so many firefighters were saving people that day, and police officers, and people just went to work. You know, the acts of heroism. You know, the climb this Sunday is 2,226 steps.
Wow.
And I look at it like there's probably 2,226 stories you can tell, acts of heroism, where people gave up their lives and people saved lives that day. So we're very proud that we're able to do this.
And your brother really, truly was a hero. He left behind, what, his wife and 5 children?
Yeah, my brother Stephen and his wife had 5 beautiful children. They're all doing well, but, you know, they're very proud of all the things that we're doing. But, you know, the money raised from this...
Yeah, tell us about the Building for America's Bravest program before we have to go.
Right. So we're building houses all across America for the most catastrophically injured service members, double, triple, quadruple amputees, those who paid the biggest price for our freedom, because we know they went to war because of what happened on September 11, 2001. So the money that we raised this weekend for the tower climb will help build these houses. We're giving one away next Tuesday in Bethel, Pennsylvania, to Corporal Tim Donnelly. We have hundreds that we committed to build. We need the help. Tunnel to Towers.
People can help.
TunnelToTowers.org, because we build them all over the country. We just did one in Montana. We're doing one in Idaho. We have one in Iowa. You know, we do all over the United States. So we need as much help as we can get to make sure that we honor the sacrifice for those who died on 9/11, but we do good in their name.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Frank, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing Stephen's story with us.
Thank you.
And making a difference.
Thank you, Heather.
Leland?
We'll tweet those links out. Meantime, a new effort underway to make Wisconsin the first in the nation to require, get this, drug testing for Medicaid recipients. But Governor Scott Walker's proposal is not going over well with some critics. The potential impact it could have on the Badger State and the entire country.